All right, and here we go, down and away. Thank you for the reminder there. Greetings and salutations, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you watching later on the replay of this live broadcast presentation. Sorry about that. And welcome once again to the Storyteller's Corner. I'm your host, Joshua T. Calkins Triberty, also known as Byron of Sidious. That's what I'm known as everywhere I go online. Um, that has been the primary moniker I have gone by pretty much everywhere since the beginning of my time trundling about the internet. If you find me, that's typically where I be. Uh, see if I get folks in. And you may be wondering, why am I doing all this promoting and putting out, spamming the hell out of the link on my phone, not doing it on the computer? I'm just trying to minimize the amount of clicking away and clicking around. It's more trying to make sure I make use of my resources as I have them. Boom. Hey Libby, how you doing, dearie? It's good to see you here. And thank you for subscribing to the channel. It's good to see another member of our little circle of friends and acquaintances who has decided to go ahead and tag on. I much appreciate that. Sorry for the view of the top of my head effective right now. But one needs to do these things to spread the word, as it were, that, hey, I'm actually on now. Largely because I'm not great about scheduling these things out too far ahead of time. Tend to try to figure out throughout the day if I'm going to be doing a show or not. And coming soon enough, these evening shows are not going to be as frequent. And I'll probably be going back to doing mostly standalone videos for the most part, and not doing quite so many live shows because I'll be going back to regular full time employment shortly. Which is good. Because doing the part time delivery gigs, not great. Not exactly a way to earn a living when you know, bills to pay, kids to feed, mortgage to pay for. You know, adulting. Thank you, Libby. It's been a hell of a month, um, because I've been out of full time employ for about a month, and it has sucked. I don't enjoy being effectively sat on my arse just looking for work instead of actually working. True, I have managed to get some projects, some side projects progressed further along because of the extra time home, but it has not felt effective. Hello, R. Good to see you. I think you've been in the show before. If you have, I apologize for not remembering you as well as perhaps I should. My memory's a bit spotty, sadly. Happens when you hit middle age. Well, true middle age. I won't deny I've hit that wall. Okay, you were in the test stream. Well, thank you for participating in that and for being here for that test out of Streamyard. Still getting my feet wet, trying to figure out the system and how this is going to operate for me. I am enjoying the use of it, and it does seem that with the free account being that I'm not going to have as many opportunities to stream once I get back to regular full time work in about another week and a half's time. I won't have as many free hours throughout the month to get on here and to live stream. So having the free account, the 20 hours per month may actually work out just fine for me for now, which would be great. There's no way in God's green earth someone like myself could make a full time go at being a streamer or a YouTube personality. I'm a genre fiction wonk and a bookish sort of person with a lot of nerdy pursuits that I'm not an expert in, but that I have a passion for. Mostly it's books, it's writing. That's where I can genuinely say, yes, that is what I'm expert in due to my time devoted to the art of narrative and written word. Some conjectural philosophy, perhaps. No great shakes at it, but I am trying to get better. Miss Luck, evening to you. Good to see you here. How's it going? One or two more places to post the link to, and then I'll actually dive into the meat and potatoes of what I want to say. Well, that's how it can be for a lot of folks. Are is there's plenty of folks who they have something to say and a great passion for their perspective or what it is they want to say, but they don't like the idea of what they might sound like to an audience. There's a fear of their self perception audibly or visibly. I know I'm no great shakes to look at on camera. I got missing teeth in my face. Right now, I'm scruffy, a little bit overweight, a little chubby. You know, I'm a da. I'm a da in the Midwest, fairly straight middle class fellow. I know I'm not the most charming person in terms of physical appearance, but that's why I try to compensate largely by being a bit of a clown. So, you know, you make up for these things in various interesting ways. All right. So, the link has been shared around, and I'm going to go ahead and open up the broadcast. Well, thank you, Miss Locke. Thankfully, my wife agrees, or it would have been a very strange attempt at courting with her years back. All right. um, as anyone who spends any amount of time engaged in the literary realm, whether it be as a poet, as a songwriter, as a fiction writer, whether it be short stories, novellas, novels, will tell you um, yeah, getting used to the voice thing just popping into other shows is a great way to get into it, Tom. It's very, very much a way to ease yourself in to these things. Um, if you're not comfortable being on camera, are then perhaps starting with just joining discords and hopping into voice chats just until you get yourself comfortable enough talking on microphone in order to gain that level of confidence is one way you can work your way in. But as I was saying, anyone who works with the written word, whether it be semi professionally, professionally, as a hobbyist, um, whether as you're working in nonfiction, in fiction, in essay work, in writing policy position paper, trying to formulate grand new theories, um, or academics who are studying mythology, folklore, urban legends, anyone who's involved heavily in using the language as their primary pursuit will tell you um, one of the most common things to have in your arsenal is not only a sturdy, cheap brand of pen that you will constantly purchase and have laying about the house or tucked away in cupboards in their full packages until such time as you run through them or lose them because you jot things down and leave them everywhere, every which a place. I, like many such people, possess a great number of blank notebooks, be they hardbound, hardcover, journal style notebooks, or the slightly cheaper but still firm uh, kind of UB style Moleskine knockoff notebooks, or the sort of middle of the road uh, Carnet Carnet style notebooks, um, all the way through to your cheap scratch pads and legal pads for various different writing tasks, whether it be for grocery shopping lists or just some notes and ideas for discussions you want to have with people, or perhaps a couple of brief essays or short stories that you want to jot down, get the ideas out of your head, rough sketching, outlines, drafting, rough handing, what have you. Drop lists. I'm a big fan of using drop lists in my outline notations and construction for narrative. Even things as simple as bullet point lists for things you want to talk about on various videos or, in this case, live streams. I won't hit all the points on this, but there was some things I jotted down that I definitely want to touch upon for a video, or I will maybe hit one or two points on this regarding something that was brought to my attention from by a friend, by Galen Halcyon. It came to my attention because of his Twitter. Twitter is, generally speaking, by and large, still a raging dumpster fire. I don't like spending a great deal of time there. However, I I've minimized the headache of using Twitter by only following a small handful of accounts, and for the most part, making sure that those accounts are either, if they are engaged in the political sphere, they're engaged in a farcical and humorous fashion, or they are entities involved in comic books and publishing. That's really about it. And the Philadelphia Eagles. But that's just because I'm a glutton for punishment, apparently. Anyhow, um, I've had this hardcover notebook for about 3 or 4 years. I got it for Christmas from my wife's grandmother. Um, it was 4 years ago for Christmas. Um, and I use this particular notebook. I've got these little tabs dividing it into various sections for specific purposes. The front section of the notebook is used exclusively for notation on my Amelia City horror stories and novella series, various recurring characters, environments, descriptions of the character or creature archetypes, that I will utilize here and there throughout those stories, including certain cameos that they might be utilized for, a scale of threat level for each type of creature that I intend to utilize, um, notes about the various visual markings that different creatures leave in their wake as they travel in and about Amelia County throughout the ages. The second section of the notebook I had given over to notations and character notes and world building notations for the Realms of Fairy novels, the Kathy Potts / M Division novels, of which there are currently four to date. There's A Midwestern Yankee in King Ovin's Court, The Chained One, Kingdom No More, and This Is M Division. I haven't gone back and revisited this series in a little over 4 years. Um, the last one was the first M Division novel. This is M Division. Um, yes, I am a Whovian or I would consider myself Whovian light because my familiarity with Doctor Who only goes from Christopher Eccleston all the way through uh, Capaldi, because I got through about half of the first season of Capaldi, and I stopped watching. I don't remember why exactly. I don't remember why exactly I stopped watching, other than to say I wasn't really impressed um, with his portrayal of the Doctor. I thought he was a bit too much of a grump. And I've read a couple of the older novels of Doctor Who. Otherwise, I'm not the deepest lore person of a Whovian nature, but I do enjoy Doctor Who, and I do enjoy the various species and interactions between himself and them. And my wife and I have differing favorite hostile species. Um, my wife's favorites are the Suntarans, the potato people. Sontar ha, Sontar ha. Um, my personal favorite are the Cybermen, which it's curious that I would wear ear coverings like this when I am, a wee bit paranoid about the idea of the Cybermen. Earpods actually would make one a little bit more suspicious of Cyberman takeover, and I do wear earpods as well when they're connected to my phone. So that's a wee bit dicey as ties. Um, all right, I mean I do intend to give Capaldi a second chance, but when I do a run through again, I'm going to start way back from 2005 with Eccleston, and I'll start over. Um, I was never a huge fan of the Daleks either myself, but there are points of interest there. Um, the next section of this old notebook is devoted entirely to some major recurring characters um, throughout the fourth age of Tamalarian tales. Characters that I um, have utilized heavily throughout the handful of fourth age novels that I've written to date and produced, and a couple of them that I've used so hard that I ended up putting away wet. Oh, interesting. I thought Davies was done with Doctor Who. And then there is the last section of this old notebook of mine, which I have reserved for notable quotes. And when I say notable, I don't mean in the historical sense, like everyone's going to know these quotes, or that they're commonplace, or that they're vastly shared around the internet. or that they're utilized in motivational posters or things like that. These are quotations that I've come across, television shows, films. Um, oh, Whitaker. Okay. Um, but these are quotes that I find notable from various films, television shows, comic books, and novels or short stories that I have read over time since I got this notebook 4 years back. And when I come across something that really sticks in my head and makes me think there is something to be extrapolated from that, I make a note of it and I write it down. I write down where I came across the line, if possible, who the creator or author of the show or book or comic or movie was, and name the character as well. Try to make as detailed in a card or record of the notable quote, the quote that I jot down, so that I can at least try to remind myself to give it its proper attribution. And given certain developments that have been brought to my attention within the narrative realm the last couple of weeks, I thought that this one would be particularly fitting. From Alas Babylon, written by Pat Frank, published in 1959, page 13 of that novel. Quote, censorship and thought control can exist only in secrecy and darkness. Give it a theatrical, dramatic little clap of the book. And that is going to act as our segue into touching upon the article that Galen Halcyon had linked to on his Twitter feed, uh, which led me to The Guardian, an article talking about uh, the estate of Roald Dahl opting to update and modernize the language of his works in order to better suit the sensibilities of a modern audience. And the actual headline of the article, as written by Hayden Vernon, is Roald Dahl books rewritten to remove language deemed offensive. And I read through this article, and I got about three-quarters of the way through the article before I recognized something. Six said, good to see you. Shade, good to see you as well. Greetings and salutations. Welcome to the show. Um, so when I finished, I had to take a moment and pushed on through the rest of the article. At no point in Mr. Vernon's write-up, well, I say Mr. I'm not even sure if Hayden Vernon is a gentleman or a lady working for The Guardian. Really doesn't matter to me one way or t'other. What matters to me is that at no point in the article did it seem as though Mr. or Miss Vernon offered much in the way of pushback to the idea that this is not a good sign. That this is, in fact, dishonoring the dead. This censoriousness, this posthumous editorialization of the immortal works of those creatives, those artistic heroes and heroines who came before us in order to mollify oneself to the sensibilities of the current reading audience smacks of the disingenuous to me. This is the estate of the Roald Dahl storytelling group coming together and listening as hard as they can to the tightening of the potential audience who are constantly looking to be offended to see if they are potentially going to end up losing potential sales because the words in this old bygone story, which still manages to bring us entertainment, to bring us joy, to bring us some provocation of thought for a younger reading audience, that it might hurt their feelings. Not to put it too impolitely, but work of children's fiction hurts the feelings of a child, the book has done one of the many things that art is supposed to do, which is to elicit an emotional reaction and to make you think. Hey Sam, how you doing? So one of the many edits that was brought up in the article, and I apologize for having to dig back into it, but for instance, Augustus Gloop in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is now described as enormous rather than fat. Okay, Roald Dahl Story Group brought brought in sensitivity readers. These are folks who have become more and more common in the literary realm, in the publishing industry, in the business. The sole purpose of sensitivity readers, from my perspective, from my vantage point, seems to be to protect publishers from potentially losing market share among an audience who, quite frankly, seems perfectly fine and perfectly happy to perpetually move the goalposts of their expectations and constantly attempt to be offended. If you were to hand these folks a shovel and tell them, keep digging right over where that X is marked on the ground, and eventually you will find something that'll give you grounds to bitch and complain. These people would dig their way through to the center of the fucking earth in pursuit of something to snark and grumble about. Why? Because that apparently is what gives them purpose and some sense of power or influence and control. Why? Why not just tell your own story? If you think this one is unfit for the audience it's been aimed at, create your own rather than tearing down a tale that has been working as a fitting vehicle for narrative for as long as it already has been. Now, perhaps a story will become so out of date and culturally strange or irrelevant that it will go to the wayside. That's okay. That's part of what's supposed to happen with the natural lifespan of any work of fiction. Eventually, it will become strange in its own way. And people will have to figure out by looking at historical reference, was this the normal sort of goings on and doings for the society in which this story takes place? That will cause people to engage in curiosity and look to the past and try to learn about the world in which that story was created. Yes, exactly, are. Much the same thing was done to Dr. Seuss. Um, I haven't read too much into DeSantis shuttering school libraries. I've heard some bits and pieces, some rumors, um, and a lot of folks made a big flap about the idea of Governor DeSantis shutting down school libraries. There was a great deal of flappage about that. What actually was done was that certain books were removed from the teaching or instructional curriculum and were put strictly into the casual reading or leisure reading section of the school library. Thank you, Tom. Precisely. Um, so a lot of huff and puff was made of something that didn't actually happen in numerous cases. Um, but again, a lot of this goes to something R highlights here. And I'm going to go ahead and show this comment that Roald Dahl's heirs did not give a fig about the will of the creator of this work. They just wanted to line their pockets. And how better to line your pockets than attempting to appeal to this newfound audience of easily offended readers? I have news for you. And this is news that comes from Nielsen Bookscan as of 2019. Now, it hasn't been updated since then, but last I knew, and last I had studied up on it, according to Nielsen Bookscan from 2019, the highest amount of pirated literature, illegally downloaded copies of electronic books, come from college educated upper middle class individuals. And these are the sorts of, and when it was further analyzed, 78% of the people who admitted in that study to having pirated books claimed to be liberal or democratic. So the very same sort of people who are constantly offended, perpetually screaming out their grievances at society, are the very same people who aren't probably going to pay for these books to begin with. They're already not giving you their money for what they want. So why pander to them? Fuck them, to be blunt about it. My apologies for the vulgarity, but sometimes it's necessary to accentuate a point. These are the kind of people who aren't going to give you their hard earned money anyway. So why would you continue to pander to them and let them set the tone for what kind of artistic production you're going to offer? If they want to demand changes be made to suit their tastes and their purposes, then they'd better be floating your bills. End of story. Otherwise, why bother? And Tom makes another great point. You will never learn about the past if you cleanse it, if you sanitize it, if you scrub it all down with bleach. And that's how we end up repeating these mistakes and these problems. Now, in very few places have we seen this more more adamantly, more prevalently than back in 2017. Back in 2017, there was this great big, not great big, it wasn't humongous per se, but there was this attempted sort of coup um, in the literary realm. A lot of kind of book clubbish sort of people took to, wait, well, before I get into that, they fired the Tolkien scholar from Rings of Power. I mean, that show is already gutter trash, but you're going to get rid of the one person who probably has a halfway decent idea of how the story should go. See, this is why you need to create your own shite, folks. Because what's going to happen is the folks who you're counting on courting to be your primary audience, they're not going to bother. The people who you're hoping are going to stick around and support your endeavors because they're already fans of what came before, they're going to look you in the eyes and say, You screwed us over before. Why should we trust you now? Precisely, Tom. Yes. So, I mean, I suffered through about 2.5 episodes of Rings of Power and said, no, I'm done. Piss on it. And I'm not even a great scholar of Tolkien. I'm just well familiar with the books from having read them years ago. I do need to have a refresher read. I need to go through those again. And to my own shame and discredit and disparagement, I've never read the Silmarillion. I really do need to go back and read that so I have a better sense of the world building lore and its origins and the various mythological and theological origins of this world building that Tolkien did. Get down to the real skeletal structure of it. I need to be better about that. I need to go back and read that material to be more thorough in my understanding of it. But anyhow, sorry. Diving back aside, reset. Anyhow, back in 2017, there was this small movement of readers who began not a hashtag, but a consistent kind of feedback loop amongst themselves, talking about a popular character in young adult fiction, a character from a novel that most American students in either middle school or in high school probably read for one of their English classes. The novel was The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton, and the character was Ponyboy. And there are a lot of people who decided to get together and start chit chatting amongst themselves on Twitter, postulating and hypothesizing that Ponyboy was gay. And a handful of people did actually put out a hashtag Ponyboy is gay. This, however, ran headlong into the brick wall of reality checks because this hashtag caught a little bit of traction. The author herself, S.E. Hinton, hopped on Twitter and said, no, he wasn't. Sorry. She wasn't angry about it. She didn't try to browbeat anybody. And she didn't try to shame anyone. Nor did she get defensive about the idea or the concept. She just said, no, sorry, you're wrong. It was never my intention to portray this character as homosexual. No offense. If that's what you read into it, I'm just telling you, you're wrong. And she was perfectly polite about it. And these people gathered in their masses online, as people are wont to do, and began screeching at this woman who had created this novel, who had created this fiction, who created this character, and whom I would therefore assume knew far more intimately and knew far more thoroughly what she intended with the character. And they screamed at the top of their digital lungs and demanded that unless she apologize for her refutation of their hypothesis, they demanded that if she not apologize, that different boards of regents across the nation remove the outsiders from their English curricula. Ponder that for a moment. Rather than attempt to engage the author who did nothing more than offer clarification rather than try to engage her in a dialogue and explain, well, here's why we thought maybe this and maybe this meant that. No, they went straight for, let's get this woman's book out of public schools because she's not supporting our particular perspective. Screw you people, frankly. This is the worst kind of abuse or attempted abuse of Roland Barthes' death of the author. Very true, Tom. This was not them trying to ask Miss Hinton to create a story that was maybe more inclusive. This was them using their perception of inclusion as a cudgel to bash her over the skull and demand that she accept their interpretation, that she accept it over her own intentions as the creator of the fiction. Fuck all that. You've no right to that. Period. There's a reason why Roland Barthes' tool set, which can be useful, sure. I used to scream against it. Absolutely. But every tool set of analysis offers something of value. It does. I can't completely write it off altogether. Right, exactly, Tom. It didn't matter. If it doesn't affect the narrative, seriously, I don't care one way or the other. But if you try to browbeat your audience over the head with it in order to push an agenda, then you're not telling a story based on character or plot. You're telling a story based on nothing but pure propagandistic messaging. Anyhow, back to Barth's death of the author. Um, there's a reason it's called the death of the author because that type of interpretation tool set cannot survive the scrutiny of clarification from the author. And it requires that the author be unable to directly address these theorists and hypothesizers and remove their idiocy from the public screen. And look, I don't want to dance in on anyone's toes who doesn't deserve it. And there are people far more brilliant than myself who've stepped into this particular arena and named certain names or pointed to various groups or personalities who've stepped in it and been cast into the public fire. But let's not forget, and I'm going to risk pissing off some folks by delving a little bit into this water. You may recall that J.K. Rowling was lauded as a progressive heroine when she came out after some theorizing online by various analytical readers who were willing to take a little bit of license with certain character traits and think to themselves, well, this makes me suspicious. When they asked her, was Albus Dumbledore gay? She said, yes, I had intended him to be, but I wasn't going to make it overt or ham fisted. They couldn't clap like a round of seals at the zoo fast enough for her and lift her up over their heads as some kind of popular culture champion. Huzzah, huzzah! Praise for the English woman. Hooray! She's great. She's a heroine. But the moment she disagreed with the further pushing of their socio political agenda, the moment she strayed from the party line, she became persona non grata. They would have burned her in effigy if the visual of burning the witch wouldn't go so hand in hand with the narrative material of her fiction series. It would kind of play perfectly into the whole realm of Harry Potter now, wouldn't it? Many of these people don't think about the absolute pain and effort and terror of world building and narrative construction, what it takes out of a person to put forth all that effort into characters, into setting, into plot, into activity, internal monologue, and editing, and scraping, and redrafting, and drop lining, and just how much goes into telling that story. If the author is still alive for you to confer with, you always go for clarification. Ask them directly if you have access to them. And perhaps that's part of the problem, is particularly with popular authors or folks who are extremely well to do. It can be difficult to get a hold of them other than through a publicist who 90% of the time, 99% of the time, won't return your emails or your calls. Um, it can be virtually impossible outside of things like Twitter, where people actually respond to each other and engage in a dialogue. You know, I personally don't care much for Twitter as a way to talk to people. I prefer Discord. Hello, Kay. How you doing? Um, but clarification from the storyteller's mouth themselves directly is always preferable to the next step down. What I'm referring to right now is known as the hierarchy of analysis. There's at the top clarification from the author. Get it from the horse's mouth. If you have a question about an element of the narrative they've presented to you, whether it be a book, a short story, a comic book, a movie, a television show, a song, a poem, whatever it is, if you have access directly to the artist themselves, ask them, did you mean X by Y? If they say yes, you have your answer. If they say no, you have your answer. And if you follow it up with, if the answer is no, and you follow it up with, well, what did you mean? And they just kind of lean back and smile and ask, what do you think it means? That is an author allowing for inference and interpretation to take precedence. There are many authors who actually do this, who engage in this kind of storytelling and narrative. Some people would say they're engaging in sophistry, but I think that would only apply accurately if they only give you that much room to work with because they're giving you enough rope to hang yourself with by saying the wrong thing and then playing you out as a moron. Ryan Johnson did this famously with The Last Jedi, with his whole snarky, your Snoke theory sucks. Fuck you, Ryan. Anyhow, um, Six Sid, that was mostly for you. I know you're my fellow Star Wars fan. Once upon a time, major fan. The old expanded universe, still good stuff. Uh, Not much hope for what Disney's trotted out there with basically making Star Wars into a fucking pachinko machine. Anyhow, I digress again. But after clarification, the next step down is inference or hinting, where the author doesn't give a direct answer, or you can't get to the author or original storyteller but they leave obvious hints, either in other writings or interviews, things that you can reference later on to say, okay, well, here's where they kind of hint at what they meant by this element of this story or this show or that episode or that film. They hint at it very heavily in such a way as to make it almost preposterous that you could get it wrong. Um, oh, no worries, Reason Girl. But yes, yeah, the world building work can be greatly underappreciated. No different than tabletop role playing games. When you've got a GM or a DM who spends a great deal of time constructing a world for the players to engage in, that is a form of collaborative storytelling, wherein the player characters, they are responsible only for their character. The GM/DM has to do everybody else, and it's a lot of work. But anyhow, I lost track. Sorry. Um, I should know better than to go off on too much of a side tangent because then I lose track of what I'm saying. Oh yes, um, hinting and inference or implication. So clarification down to inference and hinting, and clarification and inference and hinting. Don't worry about it, reason. I'm back on track now. The bottom tier of the hierarchy of analysis is interpretation and extrapolation. I, as the reader of a given text, what I take away from it, what messages I glean from it, are likely less accurate than what the author actually originally intended, and must therefore, in terms of precedence, come at the bottom of the stack. Even if I make the best educated guesses, if I string out a 12,000 word essay explaining why in Stephen King's Dark Tower series, White Over Red was actually about the not was not about good over evil, but was rather order over chaos or order over insanity, and he was attempting to put this play on white being associated as a color or a hue with cleanliness and order, whereas red is chaos and blood and death and destruction. That's that Hugh's historical association. I could spend 12,000 words explaining in beautiful purple prose exactly why I think it's like that, and refer to different films or television shows or other books where that color comparison theme was carried throughout. White standing for the robe of Jesus and the wings of the angels, and the devil being depicted as red, fleshed, and fiery. That's good over evil, and that's the law over chaos. I could spend all that time doing that, but if the author is alive and swoops in and says, "Nah, man, I just thought it was a great little line to throw out there. White over red. It's some kind of mantra. It didn't mean anything." And guess what? Guess what? Doesn't matter how smart I sound or how much time and effort I put into that analysis and that interpretation. The creator of the work is still alive and just clarified, I'm a putz. So guess what? What all I proved right there is that I can spend way too much time reading into things that aren't really there. Kudos for me for having a limber enough mind to think that way and to look for those things. But if it's clarified, I'm shit out of luck. However, if I went through all that nonsense and the author, the original creator of the narrative, says, well, I wasn't exactly thinking like that, but I suppose I could maybe have had that subconsciously working away in the background of my mind. That's where I have a little bit of an inroad. And that's where the analysis of interpretation could actually be seen as reliable or useful. No one knows themselves 100%. Having achieving the self as put out there by Carl Jung, being 100% aware of who we are internally, spiritually, spectrally, mentally, emotionally, physiologically, I think is nigh on impossible. Don't say that sort of thing to someone like, a hardcore Jungian like Niles Crane, but thankfully he's a fictional character. Uh, Definitely don't say it around Jordan Peterson. He'd have a thing or two to say about that, buddy. You know, you gotta clean your room, read Young. It almost rhymes. He's got a weird the frog voice, doesn't he? Um, Except he's a bit more polite about it because he's Canadian. Anyhow, um, the point being that it doesn't matter how much time and effort you put into interpretation. The problem with interpretation is that you could be wrong, but that's also the joy and the beauty of it, particularly when the author is alive and says, well, what do you think? Maybe they're being a dick. Maybe they're being a troll. Um, I mean, they could be. Maybe they're having a bit of fun at our expense. Or maybe, and just very possible, I certainly think this about certain authors like David Foster Wallace. Maybe their thought line is, why not let these folks torture themselves endlessly by leaving it open to interpretation and saying, I don't know, what do you think? Because some people will endlessly spiral around their own tower of madness internally, like the spires of Tartarus, the great tower rising from the depths of the seventh circle of hell. And they'll drive themselves batshite crazy. And that can be fun to watch too. Certainly have done that enough times myself. Tom's absolutely correct, by the way. I do have a tendency to stray in my thoughts. Um, but anyway, yeah. All right. I think I've rambled on without taking too much chatter from the actual chat, ranting and raving. How are you folks doing tonight? Thank you for sticking with me through that long ramble. If you're still with me, I imagine that somebody had to have stepped away by this juncture. You hear the rolling of the wheels on this chair. Sorry about that. Sort of unavoidable. Echoes a bit down here. Okay. Backups like digital backups of video games are. So you have them archived for uh, physical storage, older games to make sure they don't end up forgotten to the ages. Oh, okay. Modifying your PS3. Now, I assume you modified it so you can play some older games, perhaps through emulation or what have you. Tom, that's good. Yeah, throttle the grandkids' Wi-Fi. They don't need it. I mean, I know, like tonight, my kiddo doesn't need the Wi-Fi too much because the next couple of days she's gonna be at home learning. So right now she wouldn't need it, but during the day tomorrow when she has to do the distance learning, distance schooling on the iPad they sent home to their day when they were expecting the terrible shite weather we got here, um, she was able to hop right on that thing today and do her classes. Okay. Ich, God, Tom. That's shite. Um, can try not to go into too much of a tangent here again. Uh, oh, that is great. Super Nintendo, fucking the SNES, man. There was such a library of fantastic games and just enjoyable games on that system. You know, the 16-bit era, and I'll even float out there that there were a ton of games on the Game Boy Advance. I mean, you could have a Super Nintendo, a Game Boy Advance, and I'd say if you had the library of Super Nintendo, the Game Boy Advance, and the PlayStation 2 or 1, PlayStation 1 had a vast library of games that were absolutely fantastic, especially for JRPG enthusiasts like myself. But the PlayStation 2 had a tremendous wealth of games in that genre as well. It's how I first, I mean, the PlayStation 1 is where I first came across um, Shin Megami Tensei Persona, which got me into the Shin Megami Tensei games. Okay, I was born in '82, so my first system was an Atari 2600. Um, playing Donkey Kong, let me tell you, and got hooked me right through the tooth on that right there. Donkey Kong and Pac-Man, oh, good gods. Eventually, pole position. That was, the first racing game I ever played, and one of the only ones I was ever any good at. So that should tell you something about my kind of games. Um, I was talking a wee bit ago, actually, at the start of the broadcast about the various different notebooks that that I utilize, and I showed the this first hardcover one did the notable quote about censorship from Pat Frank from Alas Babylon. Um, but I wanted to give you a slightly um, closer look at this one. You might not be able to, I don't think you can read it in the dim lighting here, but I've got it tagged ASOIAF notations, references, theorems, and examinations. I started taking notes in this notebook tome about 2 years ago, and I've only gotten about this far in writing notes in it. I've really got to get back to it because this the ASOIAF stands for a song of ice and fire notations. I was I had begun a critical analytical read through of the Song of Ice and Fire novels by George R. R. Martin. However, I let it fall off because I stopped giving as much of a shite. Because I started, it felt like it was dragging me down. I wasn't enjoying the reading. So I set it aside and I just haven't gone back. I really should get back to doing analytical reading of this sort for this series because it was something I had promised I'd get into more of a long spanning project with Galen. So I do have to get back to it. But I'm not going to let it be my only focus in terms of my to be read list. The D&D games you used to play, Tom? Hmm. Um, yes, Galen does have some wonderful chatter and banter about A Song of Ice and Fire. Um, some points that I don't understand how he got to those conclusions. The problem there being I don't I don't focus or obsess on a single series of books or set of books at any one given time or across a large span of time. The only series of books that I could sit down and do a talk through about at any given time would be the Dark Tower novels by King, which is to my shame and detriment. Um, the Death World novels by Harry Harrison, which were no great shakes, I will tell you. I don't have much of anything good to say about those books as a trilogy. Um, I tend to need to have some kind of enormous positive notation to have a story stick permanently, firmly in my head. And usually, does that for me are standalone novels, single story or single book stories. Series, I have a hard time keeping track of everything in too many different series. Um, so I have to go back through and reread. And it's one of my shortcomings. You know, every few years I reread the Dark Tower novels. Every couple of years I reread the Tales of the Malazan Books of the Fallen by Stephen Erickson. And the other trilogy that I can talk about with any amount of passion and recall would be the first trilogy of Lost Covenant the Unbeliever by Stephen R. Donaldson. Those books are the books that first got me into the genre of fantasy as a genre. So I can dive back into those at any given time. I just need to look through some of my older notes and boom, I'm right back in them. I don't have to reread the entire series. I just read a little of my notes and I'm right there. Confederacy of Dunces was a tremendous read. It was a sick laugh for me in numerous places, particularly the jeans or the jeans factory. Um, it was darkly amusing. Um, what I was saying before about notebooks as well. Um, gonna go ahead and pull this up here. In this box, I'm gonna try not to dump out, are numerous notebooks. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 notebooks. Of these 14 notebooks, all of them hardcover. Well, one of them not hardcover per se, but sort of trade film paperback cover. Still sturdy. Um, oh, okay. I do remember those games, Tom. I do remember them. I only played, I think, maybe one or two of them. I think it was Eye of the Beholder. Of these 14 notebooks, 6 of them are journals, actual journals, just day to day observations and thoughts and ideas and things that had happened in my life during those times, during the day, spanning from the earliest one, January 2015 through November 2015. to this last one, um, which went from September 2020 to February 2022. Um, I've got one upstairs right now in the kitchen on the back splash board behind to, and off to one side of the sink that that goes from April 2022 last year, and I'm currently still jotting in it. I had skipped a month between finishing this one and starting that one. Four of these notebooks are all essay outlines and scribblings and article outlines and scribblings and thoughts for different blog pieces and what have you. And one of these four actually has a bunch of notations from D.Z. Phillips introducing philosophy, Thomas Paine's Rights of Man, and physical problems and arguments and introduction fourth edition notes that I had jotted down. Um, and then there's these three big bastards. Okay. In these are the outlines, concept sheets, and drop lists of numerous short stories, novellas, and novels for me to work on and develop and write. Out of all of the novel concepts that I outlined and performed drop lists for in those three notebooks, I think only five did I actually write all the way through from first initial outline to final finished published draft submitted and produced as a commercial or free novel. The rest I did a draft of, looked at and measured myself against that story and thought, this was maybe a decent idea, but my execution was not up to par and I can't salvage it. Scrap it. About 70% of the material I end up writing down in those notebooks fritters away to nothing. But I have to go through the process. I have to go through the work of it to find those few nuggets of material that are worth developing. And it is worth developing. It's worth my time and effort because I tell stories. That's what I do. And I love doing it. And it's worth the effort. That's what you gotta do, man. Sometimes you have to write these things down. Lord knows I'm no genius. I have to write these things down, or else it just slips out the other side. But a lot of the work that gets put into constructing a narrative from end to end is enjoyable. I enjoy the process of writing the story. I enjoy outlining. I enjoy constructing my drop lists. I enjoy drafting. I enjoy doing the first round of edits and adjustments and crops and cuts and expansions. I enjoy the second drafting. Second round of editing isn't quite as enjoyable. The second round of teardown and expansion is also not quite as enjoyable. Each round of drafting and adjusting is less and less enjoyable because at a certain point it becomes the mechanical breakdown and adjustment to try and see is this going to be narrowed down enough. There is a sweet spot, however, where you have to understand Certain things have to go. Certain bits need to be tampered with, tinkered with, to make them sharper, to make them beneficial to the overall narrative itself. Because the story is what matters, not the storyteller's ego. It's the story that matters. The characters, the elements of plot and design and world mechanics, the the point is to entertain and to engage in certain thought, not to preach, but to promote conversation amongst those who do engage with the story, who do engage with the narrative, to give them something of yourself. Whether they choose to accept it or not is entirely up to them. That's the beauty of storytelling, one of the many beauties of it. It is a gift that you give to the world. Maybe you'll be compensated for it materially. If so, wonderful. I'd love to be rewarded materially for my narrative efforts. Might not happen. That's okay. Did the story get told? And was it the best version of the story I could tell? I'd much rather save myself the embarrassment of telling a terrible story and getting paid for it and say, you know what, maybe you shouldn't pay me for that. I can do this better. And take the time to adjust it and make it better. And sure, I'll take a knock on for that, but it's what you do when you love what you do. Anyhow, sorry, rambling again. Rambling and preaching at this juncture. Shouldn't be doing that. I'm no preacher. I suspect I scared people off, my goodness. I have that effect on people. Any questions, comments, concerns from anyone who is still watching? I ask because I think it's about close to time for me to start wrapping up. I'll let it go ahead and play down a little bit. Oh yeah, I forgot. I still follow Neil Gaiman. Neil Gaiman's another guy who just I like his work, but I don't like him as a person. Well, I mean, if they know what you're referring to, then I mean, the mechanics of grammar and spelling are vital to someone like myself when I am reading for entertainment purposes or leisure enjoyment or for academic analysis. But in a field like engineering, trying to just convey data and information and get an idea across, being being overly finicky about the specific grammar and spelling isn't necessarily always what you want to haggle with, particularly in engineering where it's about building things and making sure physical shit works the way it's supposed to. you know, so that's a wee bit more important. And you've also got the medical condition that leads to another challenge in terms of your typing capacities. And that's something that is more than understandable. But anyhow, well, Tom, I think right now it may just be you and I, and I don't know if anybody else is still with us here. If you are still here and you have any questions, comments, concerns for this particular storyteller to address, I'm more than happy to do that. And I'll give it I'll give it about another minute and a half, 2 minutes for anyone else to posit a question, comment, or concern. Or Tom, if you've got a particular topic you'd like to hear me riff on for a couple of minutes before I um, go ahead and terminate the show for the night. Um, but we'll give it another minute or so. In the event someone else is present and wants to pose a question. All right. Well, I believe I am going to go ahead then and wrap things up here for the show. This has been another dose of Wednesday weirdness with me, your friendly neighborhood storyteller, as it were. Uh, if you are watching this stream later on after it has been automatically archived and uploaded to my YouTube channel, I would like to take a moment to encourage you to head on over to bitchute.com and or rumble.com, where you will also find channels belonging to Byron of Sidious. On BitChute, presently, I've got just a crap ton of videos, a little over 250 videos on there right now. Some of which are going to be coming back to YouTube. They're going to remain on BitChute on the Byron of Sidious channel over there. But I'm also going to start bringing them back to YouTube. because better to have my material in as many places as possible rather than constraining myself to just one or two locations. Spread the wealth around, spread the love. Just don't spread diseases. Um, hey, D&D, I would recommend looking for a rules light system, something like Tiny Dungeon. I think that would work out great for trying to teach someone younger their first tabletop role playing experience. Um, the system is from Gallant Knight Games, um, and I'm gonna type it actually as a comment here in the chat. Tiny Dungeon, produced by Gallant Knight Games. Um, they recently put out uh, second edition of Tiny Dungeon, but the original Tiny Dungeon, the original edition, is available as a free to download PDF from drivethroughrpg.com right now, Tom. It's a great rules light system to introduce the concept of tabletop role playing. There's not a great load of crunch, there's not a ton of rules. It's fairly lightweight and straightforward, and it's designed for primarily for game sessions or groups that will run no more than one or two sessions to get started. There are a couple of pre-made modules or adventures that come with that initial system to get you set up to kind of get a feel for how it will play as a DM and players. So anyhow, um, what was I going on about before? It's like you told Raisin Girl earlier. I tend to distract myself. Um, Shite, I wish I wouldn't do that. Okay, well, still, even I'm fucking 40, and I love rules light systems. It seems like a great idea to me, but then again, I don't have a lot of friends or opportunity to play tabletop role playing games. So, a rules light, quick pick up, quick put down game system, to me, absolutely fantastic idea. But anyhow, um, I think I'm just vamping now, kind of rambling out a little bit. So, I'm going to go ahead and get this wrapped up. Um, oh, yes, I remember now. I was talking about BitChute and Rumble. Um, so if you happen to go to BitChute or Rumble, look for Byron of Sidious, this username right here, and you will find the account for yours truly and be able to partake of that material in the absence of it being here on YouTube. Much of it will eventually make its way back here, but YouTube will be the backup / repository for material that ends up on BitChute or Rumble first. So, with that all said and set aside, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for tuning in. I would like to thank you for your continued show of support and your commentary. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to engage with this particular lunatic. And as always, I hope that you take care of yourselves and always remember keep reading.